So this is the legal framework in the Law for Teachers course. I'm Justin Bathen. So this is the broadest module we're going to do the whole semester, but we got to start pretty big since this is sort of the first module and you're in this law course and you're probably wondering, why am I in this law course? So, we have a legitimate question around what is law, and I think it's helpful to think about law as one of several ways in which society is regulated. All right, so I love to think about the underlying code of humanity and that code containing markets that help to regulate things, architectural architectures that help to regulate things, norms that help to regulate things, and of course norms being vitally important for your classroom, but also law, right? So law is the critical regulator when it comes to how do you structure things democratically. And for purposes of schools, which are generally public entities, that type of democratic structuring is really, really important. And it really has a big impact on your job. So let's make law really big. So to start with the law, though, we really have to go back a ways, and that is couple hundred years, and to this foundational document that we all know fondly as the Constitution, but most of us on a functional day-to-day basis don't have a really good working knowledge of what the heck is actually in this Constitution. Like if you walk up to someone and ask them, what the heck is Article 3 about? They're unlikely to have a really good answer, right? We know that. For you in the world of education, though, a few things are vitally relevant, and one in particular is absolutely essential. And that is an odd amendment that you probably haven't given a lot of thought to in the past, the 10th Amendment, right? So the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it are reserved to the states. So this is important for us. What does this mean? Number one, this means that law, from a constitutional standpoint, is a state issue in the world of education. Why? Because the Constitution does not mention the word education. Therefore, when it comes to the world of education, we really do function as 50 separate countries. Now, I know you're like, I'm part of the United States. I'm not part of some country called Kentucky. But certainly that is the case when it comes to education, and that's why your licensure is a Kentucky-only license. When it comes to education law, we are dealing with 50 different countries inside the United States of America, and all sort of because of the Constitution and this 10th Amendment. So does that mean that Congress stays out of education? Well, you probably know enough about educational law at this point to know that Congress is not going to stay out of education generally. In particular, we have this thing called like No Child Left Behind, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These are big federal statutes that are tied to federal funding, not specific clauses in the Constitution. They are spending provisions, meaning here is tons of money, states. All you have to do is follow these rules that we call No Child Left Behind. Well, every state needs the money, including Kentucky, so every state takes that bargain and follows these big federal education laws. But on the wide whole scale of things, these federal laws are relatively minor parts of the broader education system, okay? The vast majority of what goes on in a day-to-day basis in your classroom is from the state government. So let's go to the states. Here we are, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And in Section 183 of our Kentucky Constitution, passed in the late 1800s, we have that the General Assembly shall, by appropriate legislation, provide for an efficient system of common schools throughout the state. Wonderful. All right, so now what do we have? We have the General Assembly having ultimate responsibility for all educational aspects when it comes to schools in Kentucky. So that gives the General Assembly a really big role in education. And the Kentucky Education Code which is a pretty thick book containing all the statutes that apply to education, that is the foundational document from which we run schools on a daily basis in Kentucky. All right, so everything from your classroom standpoint goes back to the Kentucky legislature and that foundational document of the Kentucky Education Code, right? And we know things about like how do things get into that Kentucky Education Code. We know like the I'm Just a Bill. You can go and watch that on YouTube. Just Google I'm Just a Bill if you want to relearn how laws get passed, because that's very much how laws get passed here in Kentucky as well. And I could go into great detail about these laws, having been in Kentucky for many years and watched several laws move through the process, actually having given input on a few. So there is a lot of detailed wrangling when it goes to how does a law actually come into existence. But for the most part, it's just all that stuff that you learned there in 7th grade with the I'm Just a Bill YouTube video. So go check that out. So what else? So look at this picture. What in this picture is relevant? Okay, I'll give you a second. So that big tall building in the middle there, the skyscraper, that is where the Kentucky Department of Education is housed in Frankfort, for all of you that have been in Frankfort. So education at a state level is really important. So some of our biggest, tallest buildings in the state government are typically dedicated to education. The one right to its right, the low, long building, that's the Department of Transportation. And the one sort of more in the foreground, the brownish building, that is the health building. So there are some big entities that state governments do, but education being a huge part of the state budget. All right, it's huge. Now, what does that mean? So the Kentucky Department of Education is a regulatory body. It regulates things at the state level, and it helps to determine, how do these laws get enforced on a daily basis. The Kentucky Department of Education is that connection point between the legislature and the local school district, and the communication is constantly flowing between KDE and your local school districts and local school sites, because they're the ones that are helping to run schools on a daily basis. For you as educators, this comes into play through the Education Professional Standards Board, right? So like you have to be licensed by one of these regulatory bodies, and they have the power to hold your license and take it away. So there's a great example in your own lives about how these educational regulatory bodies impact you on a daily basis, right? Finally, it all flows down to the school level. And here's a typical little school out of Fayette County. You at the school building, you classroom teachers at the high school, at the middle school, elementary school, you have to deal with the full brunt of all of this educational law coming down on you. And you might think that's a lot, right? But keep in mind, the vast majority of educational law made on a daily basis is made at that building, not some building in Frankfort or Washington, D.C. To the kid sitting in that classroom, the judge, jury, and executioner of educational law in their world is the classroom teacher and the school principal. Beyond that, kids don't really know what the heck is happening. So from a kid's standpoint, you are the law. I think that's important to keep in mind as you move through your educational careers, and to keep in mind that you are an element of the state government. You are a state employee if you work at a public school. And therefore, you represent the Commonwealth of Kentucky in the eyes of that kid. So please keep in mind your role as a state actor throughout the rest of this course and throughout the rest of your careers. I think it's really important for you to understand the role that you play. So what does this all translate into? Well, this translates into some pretty hefty local school policies. For instance, here is some school district in Louisiana just pulled their copyright guidelines from some school district, right? And so these things have a tendency to be rather extensive documents. And if you go and check out your school policy, you can find your school policy, by the way, at policy.ksba.org. You can check out all the school policy in the state of Kentucky right there at that site. So you can go and look at any school's policy in the state and really dive deep into what exactly is going on at the local level in the school policy context, and then from that we can sort of extrapolate what goes on in the classroom. And that's where you come in, right? You're the classroom teacher. You're the person that's dealing with this on a daily basis. You have all the kids coming at you at any one moment. You're trying to keep all this in mind, and you are processing, making split-second decisions, all of which are in a very highly legal context. One of these kids gets hurt in this classroom. What happened in that classroom preceding it? Did we follow the laws? You know, what if you wanted to go on a field trip? There's a lot of legal issues at play there. What curriculum are you teaching? How are you teaching it? All of that comes into play. There's just tons of legal stuff going on at any one moment. If you take it all in, it would overwhelm you, of course. And I don't want you to be overwhelmed by this course. What I want you to have coming out of this course, and as a setup for the rest of what we're going to do here, and sorry this module is a bit longer, I'll try to keep the others short. What I want you to take away coming out of this course is just some baseline perspectives on a variety of topics, so that when you're in this position, you're standing there, something's being presented to you, you have to make a split-second decision. You have some foundational principles from which to make, hopefully, as informed as decisions as possible, at least to know enough to know what you don't know. I think that's the best we can hope for in this little 1 credit hour course. So there's a broad overview of the legal framework, starting at the very top, the U.S. Constitution, and ending sort of at your level as the teacher and at the child's level with you as the primary legal authority in their lives.